After the crash, Nancy told everyone we were just friends. She stood beside my hospital bed with tears streaming down her face, playing the role of a concerned coworker perfectly. The doctors praised her dedication. The nurses called her an angel. My colleagues whispered about how lucky I was to have such a caring friend by my side. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I couldn't tell anyone the truth. Nancy wasn't my friend. She was my girlfriend of 3 years. And the diamond ring missing from my finger, the one my mother had given me to propose with, was now sitting in her apartment. I knew because I'd heard her on the phone, laughing about it with someone named James. The accident had left me in a coma, but 3 weeks ago, I woke up. Partially. The doctors called it locked-in syndrome. I could hear everything, see everything, feel everything. But my body wouldn't respond. I was trapped inside my own flesh, watching Nancy visit me every single day with that false smile plastered on her face. She would hold my hand gently, stroke my hair, and whisper sweet lies into my ear. "Hang in there, William. Your friend Nancy is here. I won't leave you." Friend. That word cut deeper than any physical pain. Then my mother called her one afternoon while she sat beside my bed. I watched Nancy's face change from fake concern to pure panic. "Mrs. Roberts." "Yes, I'm still at the hospital with William." "Oh, the ring?" I'm not sure what you mean." "Which ring?" Her voice trembled slightly, but she recovered quickly, that practiced innocence sliding back into place. "His personal belongings? The hospital must have stored them. I'll check with the staff. Don't worry. I'll find it." But she wouldn't find it. Because it wasn't lost. She had taken it the night of the accident, before the ambulance even arrived. I remembered now. Those fragmented memories were finally coming back. Her fingers sliding the ring off while I lay bleeding on the pavement. Her whispering, "You won't need this anymore." The way she'd called James first, not 911. "It's done," she'd said into the phone. "He's not going to make it." Except I did make it. And now, lying here in this prison of flesh and bone, I was going to find a way to expose her. Every single lie. Every betrayal. Everything. My name is William Roberts, and before the accident, I thought I had my life figured out. I was 32 years old, working as a senior project manager at a tech firm in downtown Seattle. The job paid well, the hours were long but manageable, and I had plans. Real plans. The kind that involved a future, a family, a life built with someone I loved. That someone was Nancy Chen. Or at least, I thought she was. Nancy and I met at a company networking event 3 years ago. She worked in marketing for a rival firm, and we'd been introduced by a mutual colleague. She was beautiful in that effortless way, with long dark hair that fell past her shoulders, and eyes that seemed to light up when she smiled. That first conversation lasted hours. We talked about work, about our dreams, about the cities we wanted to visit and the lives we wanted to build. By the end of the night, I'd asked for her number, and she'd said yes without hesitation. The first year together felt like something out of a romance novel. We'd meet for coffee before work, steal lunch breaks together, spend weekends exploring hiking trails or trying new restaurants. Nancy was ambitious, driven, and I admired that about her. She wanted to climb the corporate ladder, and I supported her completely. When she mentioned wanting to take courses to advance her career, I offered to help pay for them. When she needed a reference for a promotion, I connected her with people in my network. I wanted to see her succeed. I thought we were building something together. My mother adored her at first. Mom had always been protective of me, especially after my father passed away when I was 25. She worried I'd end up alone, buried in work, forgetting to actually live. So when I brought Nancy home for the first time, Mom was thrilled. She saw a smart, polite young woman who seemed to genuinely care about her son. Nancy played the part beautifully. She complimented Mom's cooking, asked about family photos, even offered to help with the dishes. "She's a keeper, William," Mom had whispered to me that night. "Don't let this one get away." I didn't plan to. 6 months before the accident, I'd started looking at rings. I wanted something special, something meaningful. That's when Mom pulled me aside one evening and handed me a small velvet box. Inside was her own engagement ring, the one my father had given her 40 years ago. It was a simple gold band with a single diamond, modest but elegant. "Your father worked 3 jobs to buy this," she said, her eyes misty. "It's been in our family for decades. I want you to give it to Nancy. When the time is right." I'd been carrying that ring with me for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Nancy had been hinting about moving in together, maybe even getting engaged soon. She'd send me photos of apartments, talk about furniture we could buy, paint colors she liked. I thought she was excited about our future. I thought we were on the same page. So I planned it. I was going to propose on her birthday, which was just 2 days after the accident happened. I'd made reservations at her favorite restaurant, bought flowers, even practiced what I was going to say. The ring was in my jacket pocket the night everything fell apart. But there were signs I'd missed. Small things that didn't seem important at the time, but now, looking back, painted a very different picture. Nancy had started working late more often, sometimes not answering her phone for hours. She'd become protective of her messages, angling her screen away when I was nearby. Once, I'd picked up her phone by accident when it rang, and she'd practically lunged across the room to grab it from me. "It's work stuff," she'd said quickly. "Confidential client information. You understand?" I did understand, or I thought I did. I trusted her. That was my mistake. There were other things too. She'd started mentioning a coworker named James more frequently. "James said this," or "James thinks that." At first, I didn't think much of it. People talk about their coworkers all the time. But then I noticed she'd get this look on her face when his name came up, a slight smile, a brightness in her eyes. When I asked about him casually, she'd brush it off. "He's just a friend, William. A work friend. Don't be jealous." I wasn't jealous. Not really. I was confident in what we had, or at least I thought I was. But now, lying here unable to move, unable to speak, I realize how blind I'd been. The pieces were all there, scattered in plain sight, and I'd ignored every single one of them. Nancy had been planning something. Maybe not the accident itself, but she'd been preparing to leave. The question was why she hadn't just ended things. Why string me along, why take the ring, why pretend to care now? 3 weeks ago, I woke up from the coma. The doctors were amazed, calling it a miracle. My brain function was normal, they said. All my cognitive abilities were intact. But my body wouldn't cooperate. I couldn't move my arms or legs. I couldn't turn my head. I couldn't even blink on command. The only thing I could control was my breathing and my eye movements, and even those were limited. The medical team explained it to my mother in terms I could hear but couldn't respond to. Locked-in syndrome. Rare. Devastating. Possibly temporary. Possibly permanent. They couldn't say for sure. Mom broke down when she heard. I wanted so badly to comfort her, to tell her I was still here, still fighting. But all I could do was lie there and watch her cry. Nancy, standing beside her, put an arm around Mom's shoulders. "We'll get through this together, Mrs. Roberts," she said softly. "William is strong. He'll recover. And I'll be here every step of the way." Such beautiful lies. Such perfect acting. If I could have screamed, I would have. That's when I started paying attention. Really paying attention. To every word Nancy said. Every movement she made. Every phone call she took when she thought I was unconscious. And that's when I learned the truth about who she really was. The betrayal started to unravel the day after my mother asked about the ring. Nancy had assured her she'd look into it, promised she'd track down my personal belongings from the accident. But I knew she wouldn't find anything because there was nothing to find. She had the ring. I'd seen her take it. The memory had come back to me in fragments over the past few days, piecing itself together like a horrific puzzle. The night of the accident, Nancy and I had been driving back from dinner. We'd been arguing, though I couldn't remember what about at first. Something small, I thought. Something insignificant. But as my memory cleared, I realized it hadn't been small at all. She'd been upset because I'd mentioned introducing her to some of my family friends at an upcoming gathering. "Why do we always have to do things with your family?" she'd snapped. "Can't we just be us for once?" I'd been confused by her reaction. "Nancy, they're important to me. I want them to know you. I want them to see us as a couple." That's when her face had changed, a flash of something cold crossing her features before she forced a smile. "Of course, William. I'm sorry. I'm just stressed about work. Let's talk about it later." But we never got to talk about it later. 10 minutes down the road, another car ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my vehicle. The impact was instant, brutal. I remember the sound of metal crushing, glass shattering. I remember pain exploding through my entire body. I remember my head hitting something hard, and then everything went dark for a moment. When I came to, I was on the pavement outside the car. Someone must have pulled me out. Nancy was kneeling beside me, her face hovering above mine. She looked scared, but there was something else in her eyes too. Something calculating. "William, can you hear me?" she'd asked, her voice shaking. I'd tried to respond, but nothing came out. My body felt wrong, disconnected. I could see her, but I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. She leaned closer, and that's when I felt her fingers on my hand. The hand where my mother's ring sat. I'd been wearing it on my pinky finger, planning to move it to my pocket before the proposal. Nancy's fingers wrapped around it, and she pulled. Gently at first, then harder. The ring slid off, and she tucked it quickly into her purse. "You won't need this anymore," she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Then she pulled out her phone. I thought she was calling for help. I thought she was calling 911. But the first words out of her mouth were, "James, it's done. He's not going to make it. The accident was bad. Really bad." There was a pause, then she continued, her voice dropping even lower. "Yes, I have it, the ring. We can sell it or keep it, whatever you want. Just get here fast. I need you." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her. Shake her. Demand answers. But I couldn't do anything except lie there, bleeding, while my girlfriend, the woman I'd planned to marry, conspired with someone else over my dying body. The sound of sirens eventually filled the air, and Nancy's demeanor shifted instantly. She started crying, calling my name, begging me to stay awake. The paramedics arrived and she played the role of devastated girlfriend flawlessly. "Please save him," she sobbed. "Please, he's everything to me." But she'd already written me off. She'd already moved on. The weeks in the coma passed without my awareness, but when I woke up, locked inside my own body, Nancy was there. She visited every single day, like clockwork. At first, I thought maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe the trauma had confused my memories. Maybe she really did care. But then I heard the phone calls. The whispered conversations she had when she thought no one was listening. James would call her almost every afternoon. She'd step just outside my hospital room, thinking I couldn't hear, but the door never closed all the way. "How much longer do we have to keep this up?" James asked during one call. "I miss you, Nancy. I hate that you're spending all your time there with him." Nancy's response was soft, soothing. "Just a little longer, baby. We have to make it look good. His mother is watching everything. If I disappear now, she'll get suspicious. We need to wait until things settle, then we can be together openly." "What about the ring?" James pressed. "Did you sell it yet?" Nancy laughed quietly. "Not yet. I'm waiting for the right buyer. It's worth at least $15,000. We'll use the money for our trip to Europe, just like we planned." My mother's ring. The ring my father had worked 3 jobs to buy. The ring that represented decades of love and commitment. Nancy was planning to sell it to fund a vacation with her affair partner. I wanted to die in that moment. Not from the accident, not from my injuries, but from the sheer weight of betrayal crushing my chest. How long had this been going on? How long had she been lying to me, using me, while building a life with someone else? The worst part was that I couldn't even confront her. I couldn't ask questions, couldn't demand the truth. I could only lie there and listen as she destroyed every good memory we'd ever made together. Then there was Heather. Heather worked as one of the nurses on my floor, a kind woman in her mid-40s, who treated every patient with genuine compassion. She'd been assigned to my care rotation, and I quickly realized she was one of the few people who actually saw me as a person, not just a body in a bed. She'd talk to me while she worked, telling me about her day, her kids, her life. "I know you can hear me, William," she'd say. "I've seen cases like yours before. You're in there, and someday, you're going to find a way out." Heather didn't trust Nancy. I could tell by the way she watched her, the subtle tension in her posture whenever Nancy was in the room. One day, after Nancy left, Heather closed the door and sat down beside my bed. "William, I don't know if you can understand me, but I need to tell you something. That woman, Nancy, she's not who she says she is. I've seen her with another man in the parking lot. They were kissing. Holding hands. She saw me watching and told me it was her brother, but I know what I saw. That wasn't a brother. If I could have cried, I would have." Heather continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I don't know what your relationship is with her, but if you can hear me, you need to know. She's lying to everyone. Your mother, the doctors, maybe even you. I'm going to start documenting things, just in case. If you ever wake up fully, you'll need proof." Proof. That word gave me the first spark of hope I'd felt since waking up. Heather was going to help me. She didn't know the full extent of Nancy's betrayal yet, but she suspected something. And if I could just find a way to communicate, to tell someone the truth, maybe I could stop Nancy before she disappeared with everything I had left. The days blurred together in a torturous routine of silence and observation. Every morning, Nancy would arrive at the hospital around 9, carrying coffee and a smile that never reached her eyes. She'd greet the nurses warmly, ask about my condition with faint concern, and then settle into the chair beside my bed for exactly 2 hours. Like clockwork. Like a performance she'd perfected through repetition. During those 2 hours, she'd scroll through her phone, occasionally glancing up to make sure staff members saw her there. She'd hold my hand sometimes, her touch cold and mechanical, nothing like the warmth I remembered from before. And she'd talk to me in that sickeningly sweet voice, telling me how much she missed me, how she couldn't wait for me to wake up, how we'd get through this together. Every word was a knife twisting deeper into my chest. The helplessness was suffocating. I'd lie there, screaming internally, begging my body to move, to give any sign that I was conscious and aware. But nothing worked. My fingers wouldn't twitch. My mouth wouldn't form words. Even my eyes seemed determined to betray me, staring straight ahead without the ability to track movement or focus on command. The doctors had explained to my mother that some locked-in patients could communicate through eye blinks, but my case was more severe. My blink reflex was involuntary. Random. I couldn't control it enough to form a code or pattern. I was trapped in the most complete sense of the word. The emotional toll was devastating. In the beginning, I'd felt anger. White-hot and consuming, burning through every thought. Nancy had betrayed me in the worst possible way. She'd stolen from me, lied about me, planned a future with another man while I lay dying. The rage kept me focused at first, gave me something to hold onto when everything else felt hopeless. But anger is exhausting to maintain, especially when you can't express it. Eventually, it gave way to something darker and more dangerous. Despair. There were moments, usually late at night when the hospital was quiet and I was alone, when I wondered if it would be better to just give up. What was the point of fighting if I'd never recover? What was the point of consciousness if I'd spend the rest of my life locked inside this useless body? Nancy would get away with everything. She'd sell my mother's ring, live her life with James, and I'd be nothing but a tragic story people whispered about in hushed tones. The forgotten man. The one who didn't make it, not really. Death started to feel less like an enemy and more like a mercy. But then I'd think about my mother. I'd remember the sound of her voice breaking when the doctors explained my condition. I'd picture her sitting beside me during her visits, holding my hand with both of hers, whispering prayers she thought I couldn't hear. Please, God, bring my boy back to me. He's all I have left, please don't take him too. She'd already lost my father. She'd already buried one half of her heart. I couldn't let her bury the other. I couldn't let Nancy win. Not like this, so I fought. Not with my body, because my body had abandoned me, but with my mind. I stayed present, I stayed aware, and I listened to everything. Nancy's visits became my primary source of information. She was careful around the hospital staff, but she got sloppy when she thought I was unconscious. She'd take phone calls right in front of me, turning away slightly but never leaving the room. I heard everything. I learned that she and James had been together for over a year, long before my accident. They'd met at a conference and started an affair almost immediately. Nancy had never planned to marry me. She'd been using me for financial support, for social credibility, for the connections my career provided. James was her real relationship, the one she actually cared about. I was just a convenient placeholder. I also learned that the accident hadn't been planned, but Nancy had certainly taken advantage of it. She'd seen an opportunity and seized it without hesitation. The ring was just the beginning. She'd already started positioning herself as my next of kin, despite the fact that we weren't married. She'd convinced my mother that we'd been talking about marriage, that I'd wanted Nancy to be involved in all my medical decisions. Mom, grief-stricken and desperate, had believed her. Nancy now had access to my insurance information, my medical records, even my apartment keys. She was systematically taking control of my life, piece by piece, while I lay helpless to stop her. Heather remained my only ally, though she didn't fully understand the situation yet. She continued to document Nancy's suspicious behavior, noting the times she left my room to meet James in the parking lot, recording the occasions when Nancy seemed more interested in her phone than in my condition. Heather would update me during her shifts, speaking quietly so only I could hear. I saw her again today with that man. They were arguing this time. He wanted her to leave, to stop coming to the hospital. She told him she needed more time. William, I don't know what's going on, but something isn't right. I'm going to figure this out. I promise. Her words gave me hope, but they also filled me with anxiety. What if Heather confronted Nancy? What if Nancy realized someone was watching her and decided to disappear before anyone could stop her? The ring would be gone forever. My mother would never know the truth. And I'd be left here, conscious but voiceless, knowing exactly what had happened but unable to prove any of it. The suspense was agonizing. Every day felt like a ticking clock, counting down to some inevitable disaster I couldn't prevent. Then one afternoon, something changed. My mother came to visit, and she brought someone with her. I heard the footsteps, 2 sets, and then Mom's voice, tired but determined. "William, sweetheart, I've brought someone to see you. This is Dr. Patel. She's a specialist in neurological rehabilitation. I've been researching your condition, and she thinks there might be a way to help you communicate." My heart, if it could have raced, would have exploded. Communication. The one thing I'd been desperate for. The one thing that could change everything. Dr. Patel's voice was calm and professional. "William, if you can hear me, I want you to know that we're going to try some new techniques. Eye tracking technology has advanced significantly in recent years. Even if you can't control your blinks, we might be able to measure minute movements in your eye muscles, tiny shifts that indicate focus and attention. It's not guaranteed, but it's worth attempting." She moved closer, and I felt something being positioned near my face. "I'm setting up a small camera now. It's going to monitor your eyes for the next few hours. Just relax. Don't try to force anything. If your brain is active and aware, the technology will pick it up." For the first time since waking up, I felt something other than despair. I felt possibility. If this worked, if I could communicate, even in the most basic way, I could tell someone the truth. I could expose Nancy. I could protect my mother. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. I focused every ounce of mental energy on that camera, willing my eyes to cooperate, praying that the technology would see what my body couldn't show. Nancy came by during that time, noticed the equipment, and asked what it was for. Mom explained, and I watched Nancy's face carefully. For just a second, I saw fear flash across her features. Real, genuine fear. Then she smiled and said, "That's wonderful news. I hope it works. I miss talking to William so much." Liar. 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 If I could have moved, I would have lunged at her right then. But all I could do was stare at that camera and hope. Hope that it was recording everything. Hope that it would see me. Hope that this nightmare was finally about to end. 3 days after Dr. Patel installed the eye-tracking equipment, she returned with results. I could hear the excitement in her voice as she entered the room, though she was trying to remain professionally composed. "Mrs. Roberts, I have some remarkable news. The technology detected patterns in William's eye movements that indicate conscious awareness. He's in there. He can hear us. He understands what's happening around him." My mother gasped, and I heard her start to cry, tears of relief this time instead of grief. "Oh, thank God. Thank God. My boy is still here." Dr. Patel continued, her tone becoming more serious. "The next step is to establish a communication system. It's going to be slow and limited at first, but we can use the eye-tracking technology to allow William to select letters on a screen. Eventually, he'll be able to spell out words and sentences. It will take time and patience, but it's possible." I wanted to shout with joy. Finally. Finally. I had a way out of this prison. A way to tell the truth. But then Nancy spoke up from somewhere near the door. I hadn't even realized she was in the room. "That's incredible," she said, her voice tight. "When can we start?" There was something off about her tone, something strained. Dr. Patel responded warmly, unaware of the tension. "We can begin this afternoon. I'll need to calibrate the system specifically for William's eye movements. And then we'll start with simple yes or no questions to establish accuracy." Nancy excused herself shortly after, claiming she needed to make a work call, but I knew better. She was panicking. If I could communicate, her entire scheme would collapse. She needed to act fast. That night, after visiting hours ended and the hospital quieted down, I heard footsteps approaching my room. Soft, deliberate. Trying not to attract attention. The door opened slowly, and Nancy slipped inside. She didn't turn on the lights. She just stood there for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness, and then she moved closer to my bed. "William," she whispered, her voice cold and empty of the fake sweetness she usually performed. "I know you can hear me now. The doctors confirmed it. So I'm going to be honest with you for the first time in a very long time." She pulled up a chair and sat down, leaning close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same scent she used to wear when we were happy. Or, when I thought we were happy. "I never loved you," she said simply, as if commenting on the weather. "I liked what you could give me. The lifestyle. The connections. The security. But love? No. That was always just an act. James is the one I love. He's the one I've been building a life with while you were busy planning our fake future." Her words should have hurt, but they didn't. Not anymore. I'd already grieved the loss of who I thought she was. This Nancy, this cold, calculating stranger, wasn't someone I recognized. She continued, her voice dropping even lower. "Here's the problem, William. You're about to ruin everything. Once you start communicating, you're going to tell everyone about the ring. About me and James. About all of it. And I can't let that happen. So I have a proposition for you. She reached into her bag and pulled something out. Even in the darkness, I could make out the shape. A syringe. My blood ran cold. The doctors say you might recover eventually. Might. But what if you don't? What if your condition worsens instead? What if you develop an infection, something sudden and tragic, that takes you away peacefully in your sleep? Your mother would grieve, of course, but she'd move on eventually. And I'd be free to live my life without looking over my shoulder. She was threatening to kill me. Right here. In the hospital, while I lay completely defenseless. Nancy held up the syringe, examining it almost thoughtfully. This is just air, she said. A large enough air embolism injected into your IV line would cause a fatal stroke. Quick. Untraceable, especially given your existing condition. They'd call it a tragic complication. No one would question it. She set the syringe down on the bedside table, just within my line of sight. I'm giving you a choice, William. Well, not really a choice, since you can't exactly respond. But I'll make it anyway. Tomorrow, when Dr. Patel comes back, you're going to fail the communication test. Your eyes won't track properly. You won't select the right letters. You'll convince everyone that the initial results were a fluke, that you're not actually conscious after all. And if you do that, I'll walk away. I'll disappear from your life, keep the ring as compensation for the time I wasted on you, and you'll never see me again. She leaned in even closer, her lips nearly touching my ear. But if you try to communicate, if you try to expose me, I'll use this syringe before anyone can stop me. You'll die, I'll play the devastated girlfriend, and your mother will never know the truth. She'll probably even give me the insurance payout as a sympathy gesture. So what's it going to be, William? Are you going to stay quiet, or are you going to be a hero and get yourself killed in the process? With that, she stood up, pocketed the syringe, and walked out of the room as silently as she'd entered. I lay there in the darkness, my mind racing. She was serious. Completely serious. Nancy had crossed a line from betrayal into something far more dangerous. She was willing to commit murder to protect her secrets. The question now was what I was going to do about it. If I communicated tomorrow, I'd be putting my life at immediate risk. Nancy would have access to my room, to my IV line, and she'd already proven she had no moral boundaries left. But if I stayed silent, she'd get away with everything. The ring. The lies. The betrayal. She'd walk free while I remained trapped. I thought about my mother, about the promise I'd made to myself to survive for her sake. But I also thought about justice, about the truth, about the fact that Nancy couldn't be allowed to do this to someone else. If she got away with it once, what would stop her from doing it again? How many other men had she manipulated? How many more would she hurt? The night stretched on endlessly as I wrestled with the impossible decision. But by the time dawn broke and light filtered through the hospital room window, I'd made my choice. I was going to communicate. I was going to tell the truth. And I was going to trust that somehow, someway, I'd survive long enough to see Nancy face the consequences of everything she'd done. Dr. Patel arrived at 10 in the morning, accompanied by my mother and a technician who would help calibrate the eye tracking system. Nancy showed up 15 minutes later, her expression carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her purse, just a little too tightly. She was watching me like a hawk, waiting to see what I would do. The equipment was set up quickly, a screen positioned at the end of my bed, displaying a grid of letters, numbers, and common words. Dr. Patel explained the process to my mother while the technician made final adjustments. William, we're going to start simple, Dr. Patel said, moving to stand where I could see her clearly. The system will track which part of the screen your eyes focus on. When you want to select a letter, you'll hold your gaze on it for 2 seconds, and the system will register your choice. We'll begin with basic yes or no questions to make sure everything is calibrated correctly. Ready? I focused every ounce of mental energy I had on that screen. This was it. This was my chance. But Nancy was watching, and I knew she meant every word of her threat from last night. If I exposed her now, she'd find a way to silence me permanently. I needed to be smart about this. Strategic. William, can you hear me? Dr. Patel asked. The screen displayed 2 options, yes and no. I focused on yes, holding my gaze as steadily as I could. 2 seconds passed, and the system beeped softly. The word yes appeared in a text box at the bottom of the screen. My mother burst into tears, grabbing my hand and squeezing it. Oh, William, you're really here. You're really with us. Nancy's face had gone pale, but she forced a smile. That's amazing, she said weakly. Dr. Patel continued with more calibration questions. Are you in pain? No. Do you know where you are? Yes. Do you recognize the people in this room? Yes. Everything was working perfectly. The system was accurate, responsive, and clear. Now came the real test. Dr. Patel glanced at my mother, then back at me. William, we're going to try something more complex now. I'm going to ask you an open-ended question, and I want you to spell out your answer using the letter grid. Take your time. There's no rush. She paused, considering, then asked, "What do you want to tell us most right now?" The room fell silent. Nancy shifted in her seat, and I saw her hand drift toward her purse. Toward the syringe. This was the moment. I could spell out the truth, expose everything, and risk immediate retaliation. Or I could play it safe, bide my time, and hope for another opportunity. My eyes moved to the letter grid. I focused on the letter H. 2 seconds. Beep. Then E. Beep. L. Beep. P. Beep. The word HELP appeared on the screen. My mother gasped. Help? What do you need help with, sweetheart? Dr. Patel leaned in, her expression concerned. William, are you in distress? Is something wrong with your care? I continued spelling. M. Beep. O. Beep. M. Beep. Epi-MOM. My mother's face crumpled with emotion. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. What do you need? I focused on the next letter. R. Beep. I. Beep. N. Beep. G. Beep. RING. Confusion flickered across my mother's face, but understanding was starting to dawn. The ring. She repeated. My ring? The one I gave you? I selected yes. Mom turned to Nancy, her expression shifting from confusion to suspicion. Nancy, you said you were going to track down William's belongings from the accident. Did you ever find the ring? Nancy's smile was strained. No, I checked with the hospital staff like I said. They didn't have it in storage. It might have been lost at the accident site. I was already spelling again before she finished talking. N. Beep. A. Beep. N. Beep. C. Beep. Y. Beep. The room went completely silent. Nancy appeared on the screen, and every eye turned toward her. My mother's voice was quiet, dangerous in its calmness. What about Nancy, William? I continued, my focus absolute. H. Beep. A. Beep. S. Beep. Nancy has. Dr. Patel stepped back slightly, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Nancy stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice rising. He's confused. Brain trauma can cause false memories. He doesn't know what he's saying. But I wasn't done. R. Beep. I. Beep. N. Beep. G. Beep. Nancy has ring. My mother stood up slowly, her face hardening into an expression I'd rarely seen. Nancy. Do you have my ring? Nancy laughed, but it sounded brittle. On the edge of hysteria. Of course not. Mrs. Roberts. Why would I have it? William is clearly disoriented. This is a mistake. My mother pulled out her phone. Then you won't mind if I call the police and ask them to check. That's when Nancy snapped. Fine. She shouted, her composure finally breaking. Fine. Yes, I have the stupid ring. I took it the night of the accident because William was dying, and I wasn't about to let a perfectly good piece of jewelry go to waste. The room erupted. My mother started yelling, demanding Nancy hand over the ring immediately. Dr. Patel moved toward the door, saying something about calling security. And Nancy, realizing she'd just confessed in front of witnesses, made a desperate lunge toward my bedside, toward my IV line, toward the syringe I knew was in her purse. But Heather had been standing just outside the room, listening to everything. She burst through the door at the exact moment Nancy reached me, tackling her away from the bed with surprising force. I knew it. Heather shouted. I knew you were dangerous. Nancy struggled, screaming obscenities, but Heather was stronger and had backup arriving within seconds. Security guards flooded into the room, restraining Nancy as she thrashed and fought. The syringe fell out of her purse during the struggle, rolling across the floor in plain sight. One of the security guards picked it up, examining it with a grim expression. This is filled with air, he said quietly. She was going to inject this into his IV. My mother went completely white. Dr. Patel immediately ordered everyone except essential medical staff out of the room, and within minutes, police officers arrived. Nancy was handcuffed, still screaming about how unfair it all was. How I'd ruined her life. How she deserved better than this. The irony was staggering. She'd betrayed me, stolen from me, threatened to kill me, and somehow, in her twisted mind, I was the villain. As they dragged her out of the room, she turned back one last time, her eyes meeting mine. There was no remorse there. No apology. Just cold, empty hatred. "You should have stayed quiet, William," she hissed. "You should have just died." The door closed behind her, and silence fell over the room. My mother sank into the chair beside my bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Heather placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He's safe now, Mrs. Roberts. She can't hurt him anymore." Dr. Patel checked my vitals, making sure the stress of the confrontation hadn't caused any physical complications. When she was satisfied, she looked down at me with something like awe in her eyes. "William, what you just did took incredible courage. You saved your own life." I wanted to respond, to thank her, to thank Heather, to comfort my mother. But I was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained. All I could do was focus on the screen one more time and spell out a single word. T. Beep. H. Beep. A. Beep. N. Beep. K. Beep. Thank. And then, finally, I let myself rest. The weeks following Nancy's arrest were a blur of police interviews, legal proceedings, and medical evaluations. The syringe she'd been carrying was tested and confirmed to be filled with air, exactly as she'd described in her late-night threat. Combined with her confession in front of multiple witnesses, and the evidence Heather had been quietly documenting, the case against her was airtight. Nancy was charged with attempted murder, theft, and fraud. James, her affair partner, was also investigated and faced charges for conspiracy and receiving stolen property. Apparently, he'd been aware of the ring's origin and had helped Nancy plan to sell it overseas. My mother was devastated by the betrayal, but she channeled her grief into action. She hired the best lawyers available to ensure Nancy faced the maximum consequences. She also stayed by my side every single day, working with Dr. Patel and the rehabilitation team to explore every possible treatment option for my condition. And slowly, miraculously, my body began to respond. It started with a finger twitch. Just one finger on my right hand, barely noticeable, but it was movement I controlled. Voluntary movement. The doctors were shocked, calling it highly unusual for someone with locked-in syndrome to regain motor function so quickly. But I wasn't surprised. I'd fought too hard to stay conscious, to stay present, to give up now. Over the next 3 months, I regained partial use of my hands, then my arms. Physical therapy was brutal, retraining muscles that had atrophied during my time in the coma and subsequent paralysis. But I pushed through, motivated by the thought of testifying against Nancy in person, of standing in that courtroom and facing her one final time. Heather remained a constant presence throughout my recovery. She'd been hailed as a hero by the hospital staff and had received commendations for her role in stopping Nancy. But she brushed off the praise, insisting she'd only done what any decent person would do. "I just paid attention," she told me during one of our conversations. "So many people see things that don't sit right, but they convince themselves it's none of their business. I couldn't do that. Not when someone's life was at stake." I thanked her every chance I got, though words felt inadequate for what she'd done. She'd saved my life, no question. Without her intervention, Nancy would have succeeded in silencing me permanently. By the time the trial date arrived, I'd regained enough function to sit in a wheelchair and communicate through a combination of speech therapy and assistive technology. My voice was weak, halting, but it was mine. And I was going to use it. The courtroom was packed. Nancy sat at the defendant's table, dressed conservatively in an obvious attempt to garner sympathy. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. The prosecution presented the eye-tracking communication logs, Heather's documented observations, the syringe filled with air, and testimony from multiple witnesses who'd heard Nancy's confession. They also uncovered financial records showing she'd already contacted several buyers about selling the ring, with James acting as the intermediary. When it was my turn to testify, the room fell silent. I was wheeled to the witness stand, and with my mother's hand resting on my shoulder for support, I began to speak. My voice cracked and wavered, but every word was clear. I described the night of the accident. The moment Nancy removed the ring from my finger. The phone call she made to James while I lay bleeding on the pavement. I recounted the weeks of listening to her plot with her lover, the threats she'd made in the darkness of my hospital room, the syringe she'd planned to use to kill me. Nancy's lawyer tried to object, to claim I was unreliable due to my medical condition. But the prosecution shut that down quickly by pointing out that my cognitive function had been thoroughly tested and verified by multiple independent specialists. By the time I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Except for Nancy's. She sat stone-faced, refusing to show even a hint of remorse. When the jury returned with their verdict, it took them less than 2 hours to find her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. James received a lighter sentence of 5 years, mostly because he hadn't been directly involved in the attempted murder. As Nancy was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she finally looked at me. Really looked at me. And for just a second, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Regret, maybe. Or just anger at being caught. I'd never know, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. She was no longer a part of my life. She was just a cautionary tale, a reminder of how blind love can make you, how easily trust can be weaponized by the wrong person. 6 months after the trial, I walked out of the rehabilitation center on my own 2 feet. It wasn't a smooth walk. More of a careful shuffle with a cane for support. But it was progress. My mother cried when she saw me, pulling me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. My boy, she whispered. You came back to me. I had. Against all odds, I'd survived. The ring, my mother's precious heirloom, was recovered from a pawn shop where Nancy had stashed it temporarily. It was returned to my mother, who placed it back in its velvet box with shaking hands. I think this ring has seen enough heartbreak, she said quietly. Maybe it's time to retire it. But I shook my head. No, Mom. That ring represents something important. It represents love, real love. The kind Dad had for you. The kind that doesn't steal or betray or lie. Don't let Nancy's actions tarnish that. She considered my words, then nodded slowly. Then maybe someday, when you find the right person, someone who actually deserves you, you can give it to them. I smiled. Maybe. But I'm not in any hurry. And I wasn't. I'd learned a hard lesson about trust, about seeing people for who they really are instead of who you want them to be. The next time I gave my heart to someone, it would be with open eyes and a much stronger sense of self-preservation. Heather and I stayed in touch. She became one of my closest friends, someone I could talk to about the trauma and the recovery without judgment. She'd moved to a different hospital by then, pursuing a promotion she'd been offered in recognition of her work. But we met for coffee every few weeks, and she never let me wallow in bitterness. You survived, William, she'd remind me. You did the hard thing. You told the truth even when it put you in danger. That takes real strength. Don't let Nancy's betrayal define the rest of your life. She was right, of course. I'd spent too much time already letting Nancy occupy space in my head. It was time to move forward. I returned to work part-time, easing back into my career at the tech firm. My colleagues welcomed me back with genuine warmth, and I found purpose again in the projects and challenges of the job. I also started volunteering at a support group for people recovering from traumatic brain injuries, sharing my story and offering hope to others who were fighting their own battles with locked-in syndrome or similar conditions. Life wasn't perfect. I still had physical limitations, lingering effects from the accident and the months of paralysis. Some days were harder than others, filled with pain and frustration. But I was alive. I was free, and I'd learned something invaluable through the nightmare I'd endured. The people who truly matter will show up when it counts. My mother never wavered. Heather risked her career to document the truth. Dr. Patel went above and beyond to give me a voice. Those were the relationships worth holding onto, worth fighting for. Everything else was just noise. 1 year after the accident, I stood at my father's grave, the same cemetery where I'd scattered his ashes 7 years earlier. I told him about everything that had happened, about Nancy, about the ring, about the trial. I think you'd be proud, Dad, I said quietly. I didn't give up. I fought, and I won. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I could almost feel his presence, that steady, reassuring strength he'd always carried. He would have been proud. I knew that much. As I turned to leave, I noticed a young woman standing a few graves away, placing flowers on a headstone. She looked up, caught my eye, and offered a small, sympathetic smile. The kind of smile that said she understood loss, that she'd been through her own battles. I smiled back and kept walking. Maybe someday, when I was ready, I'd find someone new. Someone honest and kind, someone who valued trust as much as I did. But for now, I was content with where I was. Alive. Healing. Free. And finally, truly, at peace.